Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The Eighth Elder would definitely be held responsible. Since Lin Li did not know her at all, he felt that there would be no need to care about her well-being. He did not take pity on her, either. That was just how he was like. If the ones who got poisoned were people he knew, he would definitely try to rescue them, even if they were ordinary villagers. However, not only did Lin Li have no relation to the elven princess, he also disliked the elder in front of him. How could he possibly offer him help? Chief Elder Randy still refused to swallow his pride for the rest of the conversation, and instead tried to use the conversation to broach the topic of his main agenda. He was planning to get Lin Li to ask about Princess Alun, after which he would tell Lin Li that Princess Alun had been poisoned and that she needed an antidote. He was just trying to make it seem like he was giving Lin Li a chance to get closer to the elves, because he felt that all humans in Emerald definitely wanted to get in their good books. Actually, Borg and Cheyenne would definitely react agitatedly and enthusiastically to Chief Elder Randy's words. After all, they both valued the so-called friendship with the elves. Obtaining the said friendship would make it easier for their trip this time, and they would also gain greater benefits in the future. However, their friendship was of no use to Lin Li at all. Whenever the elder asked him some questions and tried to broach the main topic, Lin Li would reply coldly and change the subject. Chief Elder Randy had encountered all kinds of discussions and negotiations with sharp-tongued people in the Emerald Council before, but he seemed to be helpless now that he was faced with the human mage Lin Li. Before he knew it, time passed slowly, but there seemed to be no progress in getting to the main issue proper. Chief Elder Randy was getting more and more anxious about the oblivious Lin Li, whom he wished he could bury there and then. Thinking about Princess Alun's condition, Chief Elder Randy decided that he couldn't wait any longer. Hence, he made his tone even mellower, and even sounded a little polite and respectful. Mage Felix, yesterday, the sacred beast of our elven race returned to the camp poisoned, and after we brought it back, we observed it and realized that the toxins in it gradually dissipated. I heard that you have fed it something. Has it perhaps been an antidote to detoxify the toxin? Lin Li did not avoid the question, and instead nodded calmly before coldly saying, "That's right. I happened to see the poisoned moonsaber panther when I was trying to put my potion to test. Hence, I decided to use it on the moonsaber panther that was poisoned with viper's poison when I saw it." Viper's poison. Chief Elder Randy's heart wrenched up. He finally heard the name of the poison. Although he had never seen nor experienced the effects of the poison before, he did hear some legendary tales about it. It was said that when the High Elves had just begun ruling Amril, the remaining magical beasts on the mainland, which were poisonous snakes, released a terrible poison which brought great damage to the High Elves. Is it really that poison, or is this human mage just spouting nonsense? Chief Elder Randy wondered. However, after giving it some thought, he realized that the type of poison didn't matter. Since his natural rejuvenation technique did not work at all, it should be a rare poison. Yet, Lin Li could provide an antidote for it. Hence, it did not matter if it were the vipers or not, because the most important thing to do now was to convince Lin Li to help. Frankly speaking, Chief Elder Randy was old in his years, and he could be considered to have experienced plenty of things, except begging someone for help. But so what if he had not done it before? After thinking about the gravity of the matter, Chief Elder Randy decided that his only choice was to swallow his pride. Mage Felix, so you actually have an antidote for the most difficult poison to deal with, the viper's poison. Seems like you have extraordinary knowledge and accomplishments in magic, said Chief Elder Randy, who had an unnatural expression on his face even though he was giving Lin Li a compliment. Well, he had gotten used to receiving compliments, and had rarely ever given them. No one had ever had the honor to be complimented by the Eighth Elder of the Elves, yet Lin Li was unfazed, and instead stared at Chief Elder Randy without saying a single word. Despite appearing awkward as he did not get an answer, Chief Elder Randy decided that he had to continue because there was no turning back now. The moonsaber panther is my race's sacred beast and Princess Alun's ride. If you didn't rescue it, I'm afraid its life would have ended here. I'm very grateful for that. Lin Li waved his hands, and said, I just needed something to experiment on and test the antidote for the viper's poison, and simply happened to run into it. However, the Moonsaber Panther didn't go out alone this time. It went together with Princess Alun and several other elves. Due to the fact that the magical beasts that they encountered were too powerful, Moonsaber Panther got poisoned together with the rest. Hence, I'd like to invite you to help give them an antidote. Chief Elder Randy finally revealed his agenda awkwardly after feeling conflicted for a long time. Oh. Lin Li said, appearing extremely enlightened. He seemed to be trying to say, why didn't you tell me earlier? However, just as a tinge of happiness appeared on Chief Elder Randy's face, Lin Li shook his head again, and said, I truly sympathize with Princess Alun and the other elves who got poisoned, but you should know that so far, I've only treated a beast. I have no experience in treating an elf. Besides, if anything were to go awry, I wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Lin Li's words made the joy on Elder Randy's face just now disappear without a trace. He had now turned as red as a tomato, secretly regretting his decision. He regretted despising the humans and belittling their power after the latter arrived. Although it was obviously an adventurer team composed of 3 parties, Elder Randy had actually thought that it would be enough to know the intelligence on the Dark Blade. Had he known earlier that Lin Li had the ability to remove the viper's poison, he wouldn't have mistreated him at all. Actually, if it weren't for the poisoned elves and Princess Alun, the prideful and haughty elves would not have bothered to take Lin Li seriously even if they knew that Lin Li had the ability to detoxify the viper's poison. Their arrogance could never be changed. After all, even Chief Elder Randy did not know the Dark Blade well at all. However, despite feeling regretful, he still had to try his best to persuade Lin Li. Chief Elder Randy now had no choice but to persevere and continue to convince Lin Li. Mage Felix, you're being too modest. The toxins in Moonsaber Panther have been eliminated in a short period of time. I believe it should work on us elves too. No, Moonsaber Panther may be a sacred beast, but it is still a magical beast. That's different from elves. My abilities are limited and there really isn't anything I can do. Lin Li waved at Chief Elder Randy while appearing to be put in a spot. Chief Elder Randy was incredibly exasperated. Having lived to such an old age, he had never once begged anyone for help before, yet Lin Li had the cheek to turn him down time and time again by saying that he was not skilled enough to perform the treatment. Although Chief Elder Randy did not have a mastery in pharmacy, he was not clueless about it. He could tell from the fact that Lin Li had an antidote for the viper's poison that Lin Li was definitely experienced in pharmaceutics, and that he might even be a master. After all, Chief Elder Randy was the 8th Elder of the Emerald Council. Seeing that it was no longer possible to persuade Lin Li because of the previous incident, he resolutely changed his approach, and said, Mage Felix, Princess Alun and other poisoned elves are of great significance to us. If you can remove the poison in their bodies, you will surely get our friendship. In the tripartite cooperation with the other adventurers, the Tower of Dusk doesn't seem to be the dominant party. I believe you cannot deny this, but if you have the full support of us elves, the situation will be very different. Chief Elder Randy then paused for a while and glanced at Lin Li in hopes of seeing a tinge of him changing his mind. However, to Chief Elder Randy's disappointment, Lin Li did not seem to care about the offer at all, and instead stared at him coldly. It seems that the conditions are still not attractive enough, he thought. Chief Elder Randy gritted his teeth subtly, and said, We elves have explored the Haiga mountain range for thousands of years, and have sacrificed plenty of hours to come up with the Haiga mountain range's map. I can share it with you too. Moreover, since you're so accomplished, you must know how famous the herbs of our emerald forest are in Amril. If you're interested, we can sell the herbs to you at the lowest price. No, I know where my limits are. How can the elves and magical beasts be the same? That can't work. I can't take the risk. If I don't manage to treat them, won't I be a great sinner? Lin Li continued to shake his head continuously, despite the elven elder offering great conditions. Seeing that Lin Li seemed to be slowly giving in, Chief Elder Randy frantically said, Mage Felix, as long as you've tried your best, we won't blame you even if you don't manage to rescue them. Ah, how can that do? Their lives. Lin Li sighed and looked at himself. He suddenly pulled his robe of the void and muttered as if he were talking to himself, "It seems that this robe on me hasn't been washed for a long time, and I don't know if it will be too late to dry it by today. By the way, Elder Randy, I seem to have heard that there are many star robes in the Elven Kingdom. Could you lend me 2 of them?" Hearing this, Elder Randy almost vomited blood. The elves did own some star-scarred robes from the High Elves, but they did not have many. They only had a total of 3. This damned human is really greedy. He asked for 2 in one go. Those robes were not only a scarcity among the elves, they had also been precious to the High Elves in the Dark Age. Only the royal High Elves had been eligible to wear them. The materials used were precious and rare, but that was not the reason for their high value. Instead, the value lay in the 6 perfectly arranged mageweeds that would guarantee that the person wearing it would not be harmed by any magic below level 15. Of course, Lin Li did not intend to criticize their attitude. However, he definitely wouldn't fall for their tricks either. Hence, he did not welcome the elven elder before his tent, and even remained still after the latter entered. Chief Elder Randy was still waiting for Lin Li to question him. Yet, to his surprise, Lin Li remained silent for a long time. Chief Elder Randy had never been treated that way before. However, the thought of the purpose behind his visit made him suppress his displeasure and put on a smile. "Mage Felix, have you got used to staying here in the past few days? Damn it, don't they have anything fresh to say to me?" Those 2 elves who came yesterday said the same thing. As their 8th elder, you should have a higher standard than them, Lin Li thought. Although he was polite to the 2 previous elves, he treated the 8th elder with a harsher attitude. He coldly said, "Thanks to your subordinates, I've been well in the last few days." Chief Elder Randy obviously knew what had been happening in the campground for the past few days. However, back then, he had had no idea how important Lin Li was. He definitely could not bring himself to apologize. The best he could do was to feign ignorance and push all the blame to his subordinates for acting presumptuously. Lin Li did not harp on the matter, and remained cold and aloof instead. When he spoke, he made sure that his sentences were all seamless, not giving the elder a chance to speak at all. Besides, he could also tell that Princess Alun could very likely be the one of the highest status amongst them, because when the 3 elves spoke to him separately, they all tried to make her the topic of discussion. Lin Li knew that unlike human princesses, Princess Alun was indispensable to them, and that she held a great significance because it was said that she was the only successor of the Elven Queen. Besides, she was the one and only princess. Hence, if she were to die there. However, the protective properties were just one of the advantages. The 6 mageweeds were far more valuable than that. Everyone knew that mages had to rely on meditation to continuously accumulate their mana, and there were environmental and emotional conditions that had to be fulfilled in order for meditation to work. It was not possible to practice meditation anytime and anywhere. If a mage was not in a safe environment during meditation, he would likely have no ability to put up any resistance in an emergency. Therefore, another great benefit of the star-scarred robe was that when a mage wore it, he could automatically absorb the power of the stars to maintain a high recovery speed even without meditation. Mana was the root for mages. If they were to face a shortage of mana during the battle, it would undoubtedly prove deadly. Hence, this absorption could help during battles. Elemental WYRMS had infinite mana, thus obtaining a terrifying image in Legends. Due to the fact that they could use their mana freely to destroy any strong magic or opponent, they were extremely daunting opponents. The star-scarred robe was much less formidable, though its mana recovery abilities and the help that it could give to mages were not to be belittled. There were now only 3 star-scarred robes belonging to the elves, one of which was owned by the Elven Queen, the others owned by the descendants of the Star Sage and stored in the treasure vault of the Queldana family, respectively. Even in the Elven Kingdom, only a few elves knew about the robe. How did Lin Li, a human mage, find out? Elder Randy was stuck in a dilemma, but the current circumstances did not allow him to hesitate any longer. The star-scarred robe was nothing compared to the life of Princess Alun. Of course, the elves were not pushovers either. Must they give it to him just because he asks for it? Elder Randy thought. Please rest assured, Mage Felix. The star-scarred robes are not here at the moment, but I can get others to bring them here as soon as possible. However, can you go and see the poisoned elves first? I am afraid that their bodies will not last long. Elder Randy decided to pull a scheming trick in a bid to get Lin Li to treat the poisoned elves and Princess Alun first. He reckoned that it would take at most 1 or 2 days for the toxins to be removed completely. By then, he could probably reconsider giving Lin Li the star-scarred robes. Lin Li appeared to be stuck in a dilemma, as if he did not see through the scheming tricks of the elven elder. However, he still ended up agreeing to take a look at the poisoned elves, though he did not promise that he could get rid of the poison. Elder Randy was exhilarated. He felt that everything would be worth it as long as he could rescue Princess Alun, be it swallowing his pride or making hefty promises. Soon, under the guidance of Elder Randy, Lin Li arrived at the tent that Princess Alun was in. The high-level elves had all been waiting there, and they seemed to have instantly heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the human mage. In the opinion of the high-level elves, Randy really deserved to be the 8th elder of the Emerald Council. Lin Li, who had been feigning ignorance, had finally come forth after Randy stepped in. However, when Lin Li was about to enter the tent, he turned to look at the elven elder, and said, "Let me first look at the condition of the poisoned elves. You don't have to follow me. You'd better arrange the matters regarding the star-scarred robes." "Don't worry, I'll arrange it right now," Elder Randy said while nodding smilingly. Lin Li walked into the tent, while Elder Randy stayed outside, where he got surrounded by several high-level elves who had all heard Lin Li mention the star-scarred robes. 1. As the senior executives of the Queldana family, they naturally knew about the star-scarred robes. All of them knew how important the star-scarred robe was to the Queldana family. However, after hearing the conversation between Lin Li and their Elder Randy, although he was the 8th elder, they found his decision to be a little too rash. Princess Alun was the princess of the Elven Kingdom, not the princess of the Queldana family. They felt that it was unfair for them to give away their star-scarred robe for the sake of saving her life. It was not that they could not figure out which was more important, Princess Alun or the star-scarred robe, but rather that they could not tolerate giving the star-scarred robe away to a lowly human mage. It was true that Princess Alun and the poisoned elves needed the antidote from Lin Li, but that did not change their impression or opinion of him. Although the high-level elves were extremely polite when they faced Lin Li now, they still thought of him as a disgusting human mage who often hung around dirty undead creatures. Only noble beings like the Elven Queen and the 7 sages were qualified to wear the star-scarred robes. The human mage Lin Li only happened to discover an antidote for the poison by chance, yet he had the audacity to covet their star-scarred robes. They found it to be absurd and unacceptable. Although the high-level elves did not dare to directly blame Elder Randy, they still had some complaints, and did blame him to a certain extent deep down in their hearts. It wasn't a big deal to give Lin Li some benefits, but they felt that Elder Randy should have just given him some herbs, and not offered to give him the star-scarred robe. Besides, the star-scarred robe was regarded as a secret in the family. How could Elder Randy give it to him voluntarily? Elder Randy glanced at the high-level elf sternly, and said, "I will not investigate to find out who told him about the star-scarred robe for now. Everything will be all right as long as Princess Alun is safe and sound. However, in the future, please remain tight-lipped and think twice before saying anything." The high-level elves thought that Elder Randy was the one who had voluntarily offered to give the star-scarred robe to Lin Li, while Elder Randy suspected that one of them had leaked the secret, especially suspecting those 2 who'd gone to persuade Lin Li. However, they couldn't just constantly suspect each other. No matter what, the star-scarred robe could never be given away just like that. Elder Randy had long made up his mind. He beckoned a high-level elf over and instructed him to go home and get the star-scarred robe. At the same time, he also told him to take his time. Everyone instantly understood his intentions. The antidote would require at most 1 night to remove the poison, and once the poisoned elves recovered, there would be no need to give the star-scarred robe to Lin Li. With such an idea settled, the emotions of Elder Randy and several high-level elves were much more stable than before, and in fact, they were even a little bit proud of their brilliant scheme. Elder Randy and the high-level elves did not feel guilty about breaching the agreement, because they knew that humans were experts at going back on their word. In that case, there would be nothing wrong to feed them with their own medicine, the elves thought. At this moment, Lin Li also exited from the tent with a frown. He continuously shook his head and seemed to be mumbling something. The hearts of Elder Randy and a few high-level elves sank. They wondered, is there really no chance of recovery? Elder Randy strode towards him quickly and probed, Mage Felix, how's their condition? Can the poison be removed? Before Lin Li had come to Amril, he had got plenty of experience watching doctors do their work. Hence, he could easily fool the elves. Appearing like he was put in a spot, he said, it's difficult. It's not impossible to remove the toxic substances in their bodies, but I need you to make a decision. What's the matter? Feel free to speak, Mage Felix, Elder Randy frantically said. After all, these elves and the Moonsaber Panther are still different. If you want to remove the toxins in their body, I'm afraid there'll be a great reduction in their power after the removal of toxins. If you're not in a hurry, I can slowly remove the toxins for them. That would reduce the damage done by a great amount. It would ensure that their strength is preserved, Lin Li said while staring at the elven elder. Hearing this, Elder Randy could not help but feel his blood gushing up to the top of his head. He thought, could this human mage have already realized my plan? However, it concerned the safety of these elves, and even if he was the prestigious 8th elder, he dared not put their lives at risk, especially not Princess Elun's. She was the only heir to the Elven Queen, and if all her power was eradicated, what would be the point of her living? No, we're not in a hurry. You may take your time, Mage Felix. We have plenty of time. How long do you need, then? Elder Randy asked resignedly, thinking to himself that there had to be a fixed duration regardless of how long it might be. Lin Li pretended to calculate the time, and then shook his head before saying, well, that would depend on the details of the situation. After all, the viper's poison is different from others. There are plenty of factors that have to be considered. Lin Li did not answer the question about the treatment's time, and Elder Randy felt too awkward to continue asking. What could he do? He could only follow Lin Li's instructions now. After all, no one except Lin Li could provide an antidote for the poison. Lin Li then began treatment for the few poisoned elves. Of course, he greatly reduced the potion's volume because he knew that the elves couldn't tell any difference anyway. After the first round of treatment, Elder Randy sent Lin Li away, and immediately returned to check the condition of the elves in person. It was obvious that the vitality in the elves' bodies had stopped deteriorating so quickly, thus making Elder Randy feel rather relieved. Although he did not know when Princess Elun would be cured, at least Lin Li's treatment was indeed effective. The treatment lasted for a few days. After each round of treatment, everyone could see an obvious improvement in the condition of the elves. However, Elder Randy and the high-level elves were feeling nervous, and not just relieved. They were all looking forward to seeing the end of the treatment. Otherwise, they wouldn't have an excuse not to give Lin Li the star-scarred robes. However, despite having hoped for a long time, the high-level elf who was sent back to take the star-scarred robes still did not receive any new instructions from the elders, though he returned to the camp presumptuously. He thought that he would just be taking the robe out for a walk, and he reckoned that Princess Elun and other poisoned elves must have been completely recovered after a few days. However, after he understood the situation, it was already too late, and he couldn't go out with the robe again, because it would be blatantly telling Lin Li that they did not wish to give him the robe. Elder Randy touched the family treasure with his hands. Even though he could not bear to give it away, the robe had already been brought to the campground, and there was no excuse he could give to Lin Li. Since Lin Li knew that they had star-scarred robes, he probably knew that it had already been delivered to the campground too. Not to mention, the poisoned elves and Princess Elun had not recovered completely. One could only imagine how dire the consequences would be if he were to back out now. Hence, when Lin Li went to the elf's tent to continue with the treatment again, Elder Randy, who had been waiting long ago, reluctantly took out the star-scarred robe. Mage Felix, this is the star-scarred robe that you want. I believe you have the ability to tell its authenticity. Please take extra care of Princess Lin and the poisoned elves. He then handed the robe to Lin Li. Oh, this is the star-scarred robe. Elves are truly credible and people of their words. Thank you, then. Lin Li accepted it without standing on ceremony, and immediately placed it in the ring of endless storm without checking, because he could tell that it was genuine just from the magewefts on it. Elder Randy and several high-level elves watched Lin Li put away the star-scarred robe while feeling deeply anguished. They knew that the star-scarred robe would never have anything to do with the Queldana family again. In any case, as long as Princess Lin was able to remain safe, their sacrifice would be worth it. That was the only way Elder Randy could comfort himself. For this round of treatment, Lin Li did not retain anything. He used sufficient doses of potion according to the amount of toxins in the poisoned elves. After the treatment, Elder Randy could tell that their condition had greatly improved without even having to check thoroughly. Mage Felix, how much longer will the treatment take? Elder Randy asked apprehensively. Lin Li stroked his chin, and smilingly answered, there's no need for further treatment, the toxins in their bodies have been removed, and their power will recover tonight. Elder Randy, who was already feeling the pain of giving the star-scarred robe away, stared at Lin Li while gritting his teeth angrily, and snapped. Mage Felix, didn't you say that treatment for them couldn't be too hasty? Greatly taken aback, Lin Li nonchalantly said, is it hasty? It's already been a few days. If you think it's too fast, why don't we repeat the entire treatment all over again? Actually, I can go slower. 10 days or 2 weeks shouldn't be an issue. 1. Actually, the author isn't too clear whether the deal is to give LL 1 or 2 of those robes. LL wanted 2, but then author writes as though the elves are going to give him just 1. We'll stick to the initial version, but don't be surprised if it ends with the second one. Wouldn't be the first time. Elder Randy's teeth chattered, and he could even feel the bloody odor in his breath. He tried to get a grip on himself before asking, in that case, could you have taken a shorter time to heal them? Ah, so that's what you're asking. I thought they'd be very different from the Moonsaber Panther, but I didn't expect the difference to be so small. Their toxins could have been removed all at once. Lin Li scratched his head and put on a guilty expression. Seemingly trying to blame himself, he said, well, I'm just too inexperienced. Maybe I was being too careful and paranoid. Before Elder Randy could even speak, Lin Li sighed and left. A gust of wind blew past the campground, causing a few leaves to fly in front of the elves. Seeing that Lin Li had left, they felt that they had been made into fools. Outrageous. Elder, this human has really gone overboard. Humans are indeed horrendous by nature, a senior elf said indignantly. There were only 3 star-scarred robes in the entire elven race. Clearly, the star-scarred robe was extremely precious. However, 3 robes had become 2, and the most precious one belonging to the Queldana family had now landed in the hands of Lin Li, thus making it hard to accept for the elves. Greedy and shameless, greedy and shameless. Several high-level elves pounded their chests in exasperation and criticized the shameless behavior of the human mage. Elder Randy had already told them about the promise that he had made when he asked Lin Li for help. From the perspective of these elves, the Haiga mountain range map and the low-priced herbs were all massive benefits that were attractive enough for humans like Lin Li. However, even then, the sly Lin Li still chose to delay in order to get his hands on the robe. Since when had these high-level elves ever allowed others to plot against them in such a manner? They obviously refused to let the matter rest just like that. Anyway, the poison in Princess Lin and several other elves had already been eliminated, so there was no need to be polite to this human mage anymore. They were in one of the most dangerous restricted areas on the mainland of Anril, and the dangers were far beyond imaginable. There was still a long way to go. Unless Lin Li left with the star-scarred robe now, they would have the chance to teach him an unforgettable lesson, Elder, since the human has chosen the star-scarred robe instead of a friendship with us, we don't need to be kind to him anymore. After Princess Lin and the rest recover, we will continue to explore the Haiga mountain range. There will be plenty of opportunities to make him pay for it. Ferner gritted his teeth angrily. Ferner quickly gained the agreement of his peers. As members of the Queldana family, no one was willing to watch the family treasure fall into the hands of a human. Although they were feeling helpless about Princess Lin and the poisoned elves, and would do anything to save them, their mindset began to change as the toxins got eliminated, especially after discovering that it didn't take Lin Li much effort to remove the toxins. However, Elder Randy had been remaining silent for a while. When he saw the elves screaming louder and louder, he raised his hand to stop them. I think the human is already a master of pharmaceutics. We might meet with other issues while on our quest for the sacred relic. You'd better not act recklessly. Think about what happened previously. If it weren't because of that incident, we wouldn't have had to pay such a huge price when asking him for help. The words of Elder Randy drew several senior elves into contemplation. Indeed, if it weren't for the strained relationship between them and Lin Li, they wouldn't have had to give the latter the star-scarred robe in exchange for his help. There was a saying amongst the humans that without distant considerations, there had to be near worries. In fact, that was the case here. Some of the dangers in the Haiga mountain range had already been discovered after some years of exploration. However, in the depths of the Haiga mountain range, there was an area called the Forbidden Zone of Life, which even the elves had little knowledge about. Who could guarantee that there was only one kind of poisonous magical beast in the labyrinth of the Haiga mountain range? Even if there was only one, which was the descendant of the venomous viper, the consequences would be dire when they all got poisoned. By then, would they have to give away the Elven Queen's star-scarred robe too? Even the ants and insects in the forest have their existential value, not to mention a human who can dispel the viper's poison and is a master of pharmaceutics. Go back and instruct your subordinates to maintain a good relationship with this human, at least during this period of time that we're in the Haiga mountain range. This would be of great help to us, Elder Randy said while feeling the pinch. He was obviously not willing to give away the star-scarred robe. However, even if he were to try and snatch the star-scarred robe away, he might have to pay a greater price to get it back. Over the course of one night, there had been drastic changes in the elven campground. The arrogant elves seemed to have found their conscience all of a sudden, and stopped making things difficult for the humans on the campground. Although they were still rather prideful, they were clearly much more polite to the humans than before. Lin Li naturally got taken care of here. Hyolophen and Gilder, who came to visit him previously, had also delivered some elven specialties to him. What is going on? Weren't the elves wishing that they could kill him? Why did their attitudes change all of a sudden? The human adventurers had never seen such a side to the elves before. Even Cheyenne and Borg could not figure out what the young mage had done to the elves. The poisoning of Princess Lin was a secret. Actually, even the elves themselves couldn't figure out the reason for the change in their attitudes. However, they had no choice but to follow the orders given by their superiors. When the three parties met to discuss the expedition's future, Cheyenne and Borg inadvertently asked Lin Li a question about the whole matter. However, Lin Li did not tell them about it, and instead said that the elves had asked him for help. After all, there was no need to tell them if the elves didn't do so. However, after their relationship was less strained, Lin Li heard the reason Princess Lin got poisoned from the high-level elves, Hyolophen and Gilder. Despite remaining calm, he was rather worried. Lin Li was well aware of how terrifying the magical beasts were. Their power was the very thing that they relied on in order to share the mainland of Amril with the ancient Wyrms and Titans. In other words, the magical beasts did not live in clusters, and each of them fought using their instincts. Otherwise, they would definitely have formed a force that could compete with the ancient Wyrms and Titans. When the High Elves ruled Amril, they had powerful battle fortresses, the Sky Castles. However, they'd still paid a considerable price in order to expel and destroy the prehistoric magical beasts. During the entire process, the High Elves organized themselves into groups and targeted each and every prehistoric magical beast one by one instead of facing whole groups. Indeed, Princess Elune and the rest could very likely have been harmed by a descendant of a prehistoric viper whose bloodline was on the verge of ceasing. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any chance for them to return to the camp at all. However, that also meant that there could be more such descendants of the viper. What about the descendants of the other prehistoric magical beasts? The vipers were not the strongest among the prehistoric beasts. The only troublesome thing about them was their venom. However, there were plenty of other prehistoric magical beasts that were far more terrifying and formidable. The descendants of those were terrifying too. The fact that the Haiga mountain range was called a restricted area was definitely not without a cause. Even the Manhwa family, Dark Blade, and Queldana family seemed to be rather insignificant in the Haiga mountain range. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed, and the poisoned elves had fully recovered after resting for half a month. In fact, Lin Li was right at the beginning. If he hadn't slowed down the speed of treatment to stimulate the effects of the potion, the elves might have now had to suffer from the side effect of having their powers degraded. However, the past half a month was not exactly peaceful for the elves, because they now had another companion whom they could not stand sharing the camp. It was none other than Lich Ujfalusi from Tower of Dusk. Damn, why is it an undead creature again? Is the Tower of Dusk the gathering place for undead creatures? The elves all lamented after hearing the news, for they utterly detested undead creatures. However, they could only complain silently in their hearts because the dirty undead creatures belonged to someone who could make their elders swallow their pride. After the incident that night, no elves dared to criticize the pure undead creature, Ujfalusi, in his face. Even Ujfalusi himself was surprised by the attitude of the elves. Since when have elves started turning a blind eye to me? Of course, Ujfalusi wouldn't actually pay attention to those matters. Instead, he reported the matter of his herb purchase at 7-leaf grass to his master, Lin Li. Back in Roland City, Lin Li had once requested Charles, the owner of 7-leaf grass, to help him search for some rare herbs from Tree of Emerald in City of Late Winter. However, back then, Charles was fretting over the possible obstacles he might face while on the way to City of Late Winter, hence, he hired some mercenaries to protect him. However, it was said that the second largest bandit group of the Breezy Plains would be entrenched on that route too. Hence, even Sienna was troubled by this task. Lin Li wanted to use Charles's connections in City of Late Winter to reap some benefits. Hence, he agreed to send 10 archmages from the Tower of Dusk and Ujfalusi to escort and protect him. At that time, Lin Li did not think that he would encounter the elves in the Haiga mountain range. Otherwise, he wouldn't have wasted his efforts. Anyway, the elven elders had already promised to give him more privileges in terms of herbs. When Lin Li left the Tower of Dusk, 7-leaf grass's team had also set off at the same time. However, when Ujfalusi left, Lin Li had instructed him to meet him in the Haiga mountain range after arriving at the City of Late Winter. Lin Li, too, knew that he lacked some manpower, and Ujfalusi had already recovered his legendary realm power. It was a huge support for his quest in the Haiga mountain range. After escorting the 7-leaf grass team to the City of Late Winter, Ujfalusi left the 10 archmages behind to continue protecting the 7-leaf grass team while he entered the elven camp using the soul contract according to Lin Li's previous instructions. Although Ujfalusi was alone, liches had their own resources. Apart from the fear he felt because of the hatching of the elemental Wyrm, he did not encounter too many obstacles along the way. However, although the City of Late Winter was on the edge of the Emerald Forest, it was still rather far. Hence, Ujfalusi was a few days later than the high-level elf who had returned with the star-scarred robe. The elven Queldana family, Manhwa family, Dark Blade, and Tower of Dusk sat together to discuss what their next move as a team should be. At the same time, in addition to the 8th Elder Randy and a few high-level elves, there was also the breathtakingly beautiful Princess Elune present. Actually, Lin Li was quite surprised when he first found out about the identity of Princess Elune. Princess Elune was rather significant to the elves, and as she was the only successor of the Elven Queen, her death would definitely cause unredeemable damage to the elves. Although Lin Li was curious, he did not question the Elven elders, because it concerned their affairs and there was nothing for him to find out. First, Elun explained the experiences that she and her peers had, after which Elder Randy told her the clues he had found about the lost relic. During this resting period, the human tripartite cooperation had also been studying and discussing, after which they found the likely location of the Immortal King's treasure. After comparing it to the leads provided by Elder Randy, they found that their guesses concurred, but no one could tell the relationship between the treasure of the Immortal King and the lost relic of the elves. However, Elder Randy made a promise to the humans on behalf of the elves, and even though their goals were overlying, the elves only wanted their own sacred relic, and wouldn't touch the Immortal King's treasure. Soon, they reached a consensus and set off deeper into the Haiga mountain range using the route that they had mapped out. As adventurers in this world, everyone knew that there bound to be plenty of danger and uncertainties in the Haiga mountain range. Hence, when they were packing up with heavy hearts, the elves and humans were all solemn and conscientious as they had no idea if they could make it out alive, but they did not have a reason to back out. When they finally entered the deeper areas of the Haiga mountain range, they realized why it was known as the area where life was forbidden. They saw magnificent and powerful magical beasts which the adventurers could not identify, because they had never even seen them before. There were also level 16 and level 17 magical beasts, but were surprisingly the ones at the bottom of the food chain in the area. Just like how a person couldn't avoid stepping on someone else's foot in a dense crowd, battling would be inevitable here. After leaving a magical beast's territory, they would soon step into another group of magical beasts' territory. There were no buffer zones in between territories at all. Hence, it was often impossible for the adventure team composed of humans and elves to find a place to set up a camp. At this juncture, everyone could finally understand why they had had to rest for so long. Over here, resting would be considered a luxury that they could not afford. In fact, there were more magical beasts at night, all of which were extremely terrifying. There was no time for rest at all. Even though the adventurers took turns to fight, the situation was still too intense for rest. The only exception in this team was none other than Lin Li, the president of the Tower of Dusk, and his undead creatures. The three of them were like masters who did nothing. Throughout the past 2 weeks of adventure, they would put an effort as minimal as possible during all the battles that they encountered, and would never take action unless necessary. However, they definitely made plenty of gains such as highly priced magical crystals. Not to mention, they did not feel embarrassed about taking these benefits at all. The Manhwa family and Dark Blade had long gotten used to this, but the elves got a great eye-opener. They had long heard about the shameless nature of humans from their elders, but some of them had still been doubtful. However, after witnessing this, they realized that their elders were speaking the truth. They thought, "They're so shameless, especially that undead creature." Not only did he rush to get the gains, he actually shapeshifted into bats to take everything away. After the bats gathered together, they quickly scooped up the magical crystals and handed them over to the shameless human mage, without feeling any guilt at all. Actually, they weren't there for the magical crystals, anyway. However, they found Lin Li's and the vampire's behavior to be overboard. If you want the magical crystals, you can attack the magical beasts. You're both legendary powerhouses, is it that difficult to deal with the magical beasts? After more than half a month, the elves felt increasingly disgusted with Lin Li. They were both intelligent races, but why was the difference so great? However, some elves dared not show their displeasure, because it was not only the instructions of their superiors, but also because they really needed Lin Li's help. After entering the depths of the Haiga mountain range, those powerful magical beasts were indeed a great threat to the adventure team. However, the genuinely lethal threat actually came from the magical beasts, which seemed unassuming on the surface. In fact, their power did not allow them to be qualified as magical beasts. Toxins and curses were some of the very tricky weapons that magical beasts were born with. In the deeper areas of the Haiga mountain range, where life was forbidden, the magical beasts that had survived relying on toxins and curses definitely had unimaginable power. Low-level antidotes would be of no use here. Even the high-level potions prepared by the elves in advance didn't have that great of an effect. At this moment, they finally realized how important the annoying human mage was. Although Lin Li did not take initiative to attack the magical beasts, and even got Norfeller to snatch the gains, he would never hesitate to help any poisoned humans or elves. Of course, the only reason he could be so magnanimous was because the herbs were all supplied by the elves. Under such circumstances, no one dared to say anything, no one could guarantee that they wouldn't get poisoned either. Everyone knew that the young mage Lin Li could turn against the elven elders for the sake of his undead creatures. Offending him would be akin to losing their chance to live. If they were to get poisoned, the consequences would be far greater than losing just a few magical crystals. The elves did not know much about Princess Elune and the rest getting poisoned, nor did they know what kind of a price they had paid to get Lin Li to help. However, the fact that the Eighth Elder had personally sought help from a human was shocking enough. In the opinion of several elves, the price of sacrificing one's pride could not be balanced by anything else. Finally, after more than half a month of hard exploration, the exhausted adventurer team came to a cliff, which was one of the places that the elves claimed to be a clue. It was also a landmark mentioned in the humans' treasure map. After clearing and driving out the surrounding magical beasts, the team began to set up tents. All of them truly needed a break at this time, be it humans or elves, though they only had very little time to rest. While setting up the tent, the main figures proceeded to look around the cliff in a bid to see what clues they could find. In such a place, the average person would no longer be able to complete the investigation work, even if he was a legendary powerhouse, for the outcome would be miserable, and they would end up being eaten by the beasts. Hence, if they wanted to understand the situation and find clues, it could only be done by several legendary powerhouses. Master Felix, the situation seems to be unfavorable, Cheyenne said with a frown after arriving at the cliff. Unfavorable? It's terrible. Lin Li was actually clearer than the rest that there was a strong menace of the dragon coming from the bottom of the cliff, because he had a deeper experience than several other legendary powerhouses. Not long ago in the valley, he had a battle against the projected avatar of the elemental Wyrm. Not to mention, Xiaohua that was living in Dream Garden in his ring needed several magical crystals a day for it to be appeased. With a sullen expression, Borg said, "It's the menace of the dragon. Is there a Wyrm below this cliff?" Lin Li shook his head, and said, "It is the menace of the dragon, but there's more than just one Wyrm." He could feel how complicated and powerful the menace of the dragon was, thus indicating that the source of it was more than just one Wyrm. Of course, it was uncertain if that was a good thing. Whether it was a Wyrm with a strong menace of the dragon or a few Wyrms with a weaker one that were harder to deal with was a subjective issue. However, Lin Li's words attracted the attention of Elder Randy, who shot him a peculiar glance. After all, it was not an easy task for legendary figures to sense the menace of the dragon deeply, because as long as a Wyrm appeared, it would definitely be above the legendary realm. Hence, the menace of the dragon had a great impact on legendary figures. Several legendary powerhouses stood silently on the cliff, calculating the possibilities in their heads. Although they had encountered many powerful magical beasts along the way, ordinary magical beasts could not compare to Wyrms at all. At this point, no one was willing to back out, but they had to consider how to deal with the numerous Wyrms that possibly existed below the cliff. The bottom of the cliff was shrouded in thick mist, making it impossible for them to see anything. They could all tell from the menace of the dragon that the Wyrm that was exuding it definitely was powerful, above the legendary level. It also had extremely high magic resistance, physical defense, natural talent, and dragon language magic. Even if the mage was of the same level, he definitely wouldn't be able to attack it, let alone kill it. Although this adventure team was composed of the elites of all forces, and was extremely powerful, they would have to pay a painful price to obtain victory. Not to mention, they still had no idea how many Wyrms there were in total. Even if they were to send out all subordinates, there might not be a desirable effect. Feeling concerned, the crowd returned to the camp to discuss what to do next. However, they had an advantage which was also rather perplexing. There were very few magical beasts there, perhaps because of the menace of the dragon. Even magical beasts of the same level and strength would be affected. Not to mention, there was apparently more than one WYRM below the cliff. Upon returning, Elder Randy first sent a few teams of elves to go out and reconnoiter around the place. The existence of the menace of the dragon actually made the place less dangerous than elsewhere, hence, the elves could look around safely. Actually, the problem that they were now facing was how to get to the bottom of the cliff and how to deal with the WYRMs that could possibly appear. Be it from the clues found by the elves or the ones in the humans' treasure map, they could deduce that the immortal king's treasure had something to do with the bottom of the cliff. In fact, Lin Li was much more certain than anyone else because his debris of the stars allowed him to sense that Thunderbolt was somewhere below the cliff. However, getting to the bottom of the cliff was indeed a problem that they had to think about. Although legendary mages could fly, they still had no idea how tall the cliff was. Besides, they might encounter the attacks of WYRMs along the way. Due to the fact that legendary mages used plenty of mana, most of their battles would be conducted in the air. It could be said that fighting in the air was not difficult for them. However, the dense fog under the cliff was difficult to explore even with mental strength. If one wanted to fight in such an environment, there would at least be mental suppression handicapping them by half. If they were to encounter a WYRM at that time, they might really die. After some discussion, they still did not find a good solution, hence, they had no choice but to wait for the reconnoiters to come back in hopes that the latter would bring some news that they could discuss and develop a few options. The team rested for 2 days near the cliff. Due to the menace of the dragon, they were not bothered by any magical beasts in those 2 days. It could be said that they had a good rest. Although the menace of the dragon also had a certain influence on humans and elves, it only radiated naturally, and was not suppressing the humans. That was the difference between the intelligent races and magical beasts. Finally, a team of elves returned with good news. They explored along the cliff and found a road that seemed to allow them to make a detour to the bottom of the cliff. However, the strength of the team was limited, hence, they had yet to explore the way in detail. Not only were there terrifying beasts along the way, there were also poisonous gases all around them, as well as a mysterious power that limited all the nature magic. However, the piece of news still made them feel rather energized. Elder Randy rewarded those elves before discussing the route with the humans. According to the news brought back by the elves, it would be basically impossible for a large team to enter. Lin Li analyzed the poisonous gas that they had collected and found that it was not feasible to formulate an antidote for it, even though it was not as difficult to deal with as Viper's poison. However, the legendary level poison could remain hidden in the body. As long as he could take care of himself, there would be nothing to worry about. Lin Li immediately expressed his approval of the list of candidates, after which Borg and the rest followed suit. Lin Li was definitely included on the list, together with his follower, the vampire Norfeller. Although Norfeller had yet to reach the legendary realm, he was just a step away from it. Besides, as an undead creature, he definitely had a strong resistance towards poison. Next was the Lich Ujfalusi, who had arrived later. Although he was not outstanding in terms of power, he was definitely capable since he could summon a humorous WYRM. Apart from Lin Li and his followers, the other humans included Cheyenne, the only legendary mage of the Manhwa family, the 3 legendary realm leaders of the Dark Blade, and Borg's son, Stephen. For the elves, it would be the legendary realm druids, Chief Elder Randy and Princess Elune, as well as Kjolfen and Gilder who had once asked Lin Li to help them. After some serious preparations, the team formed by legendary figures swiftly sped in a certain direction according to the information provided. Due to the influence of the menace of the dragon, there were no obstacles along the way, and the team soon arrived at the place found by the reconnoiters. Under the shroud of green mist, they saw a road that extended downwards, all the way into the deeper areas of the mist. Actually, it was not a pathway, because it was surrounded by plenty of strange rocks on the ground. Even though it was spacious, which meant that it might be affected by poisonous fog. Plants were scarce too. Some vaguely visible magical beast skeletons could be seen in the mist, and amongst them were some strong and fearsome magical beasts that they had once dealt with. "Elder, this is the place," said the elf who had been leading the way. At the moment, the elven scouts still could not deduce if they could make it to the bottom of the cliff. After all, with their current abilities, they still could not delve deeper to explore. However, according to the direction of the path, they could roughly deduce that it was likely possible to reach the bottom of the cliff. The reconnoitering elves were sent back, and the legendary powerhouse team was getting ready to delve into the fog. However, before they got ready to enter, Elder Randy reminded, "We have come all the way, and we have not encountered any magical beasts yet due to the influence of menace of the dragon. However, we must still be very careful whilst in this poisonous mist. According to the investigations we've done over the past centuries, some of the magical beasts are very fond of highly poisonous environments, and such magical beasts are often very scary. Just because there was some deterrence provided by the menace of the dragon, it did not mean that one could brave the poisonous fog without any surprises and dangers. Since humans and elves could suppress their fear towards the menace of the dragon, not all magical beasts were afraid of it either. Besides, while the fog might be intensely poisonous and could only be resisted by legendary figures, to some magical beasts, it was delectable like fresh air to humans. Some magical beasts were naturally born with fire attribute, hence, they mostly enjoyed environments with abundant fire elements. Meanwhile, the magical beasts with water attribute mostly lived in rivers and seas. Hence, it was no surprise that the magical beasts whose innate ability was related to poison liked to be shrouded in poisonous gas. Even though there was still the menace of the dragon nearby, they wouldn't mind taking the risk for the sake of poisonous gas. Everyone there was a legendary powerhouse, and could be considered knowledgeable. Hence, after hearing Elder Randy's reminder, everyone nodded in unison. Although legendary figures could resist against the poisonous fog, it did not mean that they could resist the magical beasts. If they were to be attacked because of their own carelessness, they would be in deep trouble. After entering the foggy area, everyone felt that their vision was hindered, thus depriving them of the ability to look at distant objects. Every legendary powerhouse was keeping his guard up and slowly making his way to the deeper areas. Although the legendary powerhouse team was made up of 4 factions, they formed an inverted triangle. The 4 legendary powerhouses of the Elven family were in charge of one of the corners, while the 3 legendary powerhouses of the Dark Blade and Steven took charge of another. The last was then supported by Lin Li, his followers, and Cheyenne. The reality proved that Elder Randy's previous worries were not uncalled for. The team actually met an obstacle not long after entering the fog. More than a dozen giant scorpions in emerald shells suddenly plunged out of the ground and through the rocks. The claws of the giant scorpions were almost the size of a human, and their shiny shells were as smooth as mirrors. The weakest amongst them was actually level 16, and 2 of them were already close to the legendary realm. The Dark Blade's corner was severely pressured as the 4 of them were surrounded by 7 scorpions, 2 of which were the strongest. The rest that were scattered all over proceeded to attack the elves, Lin Li, and the rest. These giant scorpions were actually not that rare, and the adventurers often ran into them in deserts. The giant scorpions in the outside world were not too formidable, for they were at most level 10 or so. Level 15 ones could be considered the kings of scorpions. Yet, the giant scorpions here were much more powerful, perhaps because of the nourishing abilities of the poisonous fog. Be it aggressiveness or their defensive abilities, they were definitely terrifying and the first thing that could be determined was that only the legendary powerhouses could step into the poisonous gas and explore the path. Not to forget, there was a force that restricted nature magic. In other words, druids had to be excluded. Hence, there were very few people who could explore the path. Is there anything else you guys would like to add to the issue of candidates? After roughly shortlisting some participants for the expedition, Elder Randy decided to ask for the opinions of the humans. Borg looked around and turned to look at Elder Randy again. "My son, Steven, may have yet to reach the legendary realm, but he has a special physique that makes him immune to poisonous gas. Let him tag along. Hearing that Borg, the spokesperson of the Dark Blade, had mentioned Steven, Lin Li turned to look at him and realized that he seemed to be hiding something. Everyone knew how dangerous that path was, and the poisonous gas was only one of the many dangers. However, Lin Li did not probe, since Borg wanted his son to tag along. He turned to look at the Elven Elder, and calmly asked, "Elder, since there's a force there that restricts nature magic, you guys. You're a druid, right? Miss Alun should be a druid too." Actually, that path was not the only dangerous one. Many other areas in Haiga mountain range contained forces that would restrict and suppress nature magic. However, the deeper into the range, the weaker the force would be compared to the borders. Elder Randy smiled and said, "Mage Felix, don't worry. We have a solution for this problem, though it's going to be rather troublesome and we can't use it on a large scale. Otherwise, the Haiga mountain range would have really become ours." Why did Steven join the expedition this time? Although Borg was constantly smiling, it was uncertain if he could put the feud between Lin Li and Steven aside after the alliance was broken. After shifting his attention back onto the battlefield, Lin Li shook his head when he saw the Dark Blade, for he felt that it would be impossible for them to go all out, just because of the giant scorpions. Suddenly, Lin Li's pupils constricted a little. Baldella, the blonde-haired leader of the Dark Blade, whipped his sword out to fight them. He cut off the pair of giant pliers belonging to the level 19 giant scorpion. He then stabbed the scorpion again to cut it in half. The giant scorpion, whose strength was close to legendary realm, was killed by Baldella's sword. It seemed as easy as a pie, but Lin Li knew that the shells of the giant scorpions were not just meant for decorative purposes. Coupled with strength that was almost at legendary realm, even a sword sage might only be able to attack it by finding its weakness. However, Baldella did live up to his strong and powerful image, and managed to destroy it using brute force. There were plenty of sword sages who could do that, but it was not that easy to do it so silently. However, Lin Li knew that Baldella's attack was definitely not as effortless as it seemed. That reminded him of a word he had heard before traveling to the world of Anril, effortless. It did not just express one's strength, but also the mage's comprehension of the rule power. The founder of the legendary Dark Blade, the mysterious legendary bandit, Lansdale, was terrifying enough to send chills down the spines of others even though he was not that outstanding. As elegant as an ancient, classic aristocrat, the bandit was naturally poised. Even though he wasn't comparable to the elves, he was definitely not pretentious, and his elegant mannerisms were often impressive. However, behind the elegant man stood a giant scorpion that instantly disintegrated and crumbled like a toy that was assembled at the last minute before it could even do anything to obstruct them. Lin Li knew that this was not all of their power, but he could tell how strong they were just from this. As for Steven, who Borg had intentionally brought along, Lin Li noticed that just like himself, Steven had yet to take any action right from the beginning. He then turned to look at the elves. Although they were also fighting the giant scorpions, there were not too many of the giant scorpions attacking them, only 5 level 17 or level 18 ones. The Elven Elder waved his staff, and a light was cast onto a giant scorpion, after which it maniacally began attacking its peers. Gilder held up a carved longbow, and as the bowstring was pulled slowly, there seemed to be a stream of light surrounding the arrow. With a loud explosive sound, the arrow vanished instantly, while the giant scorpion that was darting towards him began bleeding from its head all of a sudden. An arrow then pierced through its body. Lin Li stroked his chin and thought to himself that none of his partners were easy to deal with. Although they were of different professions, they were still legendary figures, after all. Since they could make it on this journey, they were obviously not useless. The giant scorpions were soon annihilated, and the team continued to advance into the poisonous fog. The deeper they delved, the thicker the fog became, thus hampering their vision even further. Although the fog was becoming thicker and thicker, the environment was still a background for the strong magical beasts, and to the team, the giant scorpions were just appetizers. As they continued to go deeper, the magical beasts that they met became harder and harder to deal with. They had to contribute more power in order to continue. Most terrifyingly, the magical beasts that thrived in the poisonous fog were more or less mutated compared to the outside world's versions. The toxins in their attacks were rampant and even more concentrated than the poison around them because of the accumulation of toxic properties in their bodies. Even the legendary powerhouses had no choice but to be extremely careful. A misstep would cause them to be in danger. As more and more powerful magical beasts appeared, Lin Li began to get a clearer idea of his peers' abilities and strengths. Apart from the elves and the Dark Blade, Cheyenne of the Manhwa family was hard to deal with too. The fact that he could work against the Dark Blade, which had 3 legendary leaders for so many years, meant that he was rather capable himself. After walking for about half a day, they finally saw a decrease in the incline of the slope. Everyone deduced that they were likely to be approaching the bottom of the cliff after some calculation. However, at this juncture, all of the legendary powerhouses of the team, including Lin Li, who seemed to be idling around all the time, appeared to be rather heavy-hearted. They could sense the strong menace of the dragon that was much more intense than on top of the cliff. WYRMS could be considered the strongest magical beasts in Amrel, even though they were a lot weaker than the prehistoric dragons. However, adult WYRMS were at least level 20. Coupled with high magical resistance and defensive abilities and the dragon language magic they also inherited, they were still powerful and strong existences to the humans and the elves. As the team continued to go deeper, the oppressive pressure of the menace of the dragon began to increase, and there were no longer any magical beasts to stop the team from advancing. On both sides of the road, there were more and more tall cliffs, and everyone seemed to have reached a spacious canyon. All of a sudden, Elder Randy stopped in his tracks and looked up in the sky. Before the rest could look up, the sounds of a WYRM howling filled the air, causing everyone's expression to change. The roar of the WYRM echoed in the canyon, destroying the peace and silence within it. Next, more erratic and chaotic roars of WYRMS began to rise, and the air seemed to be shaking together with the sounds. The poisonous fog seemed to begin spreading too. Although everyone knew that encountering WYRMS was inevitable before they arrived, they obviously could not help but be shaken when it was really time to face the WYRMS. Everyone turned to look up at the sky and began to catch sight of the poisonous fog that made their vision rather blurry. They were greeted with a terrifying sight that brought fear to their souls. Grim-looking dragons roared from the depths of the canyon, each appearing domineering and daunting. All of their formidable auras combined together were enough to bring about a major change that made the world shudder. The entire huge canyon seemed to be unable to withstand the destructive auras of the dragons as it shook slightly. At this moment, the spacious canyon seemed to have become cramped and crowded, while the gigantic figures covered the sky and filled the canyon like air fortresses that would crush and destroy everything in their path. They weaved through the canyon and caused all the rocks and boulders to crumble, making sounds that seemed to be a prelude to death and destruction when combined with the roaring of the WYRMS. Poisonous. Lin Li continued to act in his usual style, and remained unfazed by the incoming giant scorpions as if they were just illusions. Cheyenne had no choice but to sigh and wave the magic staff in his hand to take down the giant scorpions. However, Lin Li was not exactly unconcerned about the situation. He shifted his gaze onto the members of Dark Blade, who were fighting the giant scorpions. Although he had already gotten along with Dark Blade for a period of time, the other 2 leaders apart from Borg seemed to be rather mysterious. Lin Li had no idea what kind of powers they had, but he knew that they gave him a terrible feeling. Everyone knew that cooperative relationships formed because of benefits often meant that the partnership would end when the benefits were obtained. When that happened, it would be akin to giving one's life to others. Although the 3 legendary leaders of the Dark Blade had been taking action and contributing along the way, Lin Li could tell that they did not go all out. However, at this point, it was uncertain if they could continue to hold back their powers. The giant scorpions thrived in the outer borders of the poisonous gas, and they were unsure if there would be no stronger magical beast as they delved deeper. If they were to really face WYRMS at the bottom of the cliff, could those leaders continue to hold back? Out of the 4 cooperating parties, Lin Li was definitely the weakest one, Hence, he had to consider plenty of issues because the other three parties definitely had reasons to attack him. The Manhwa family was not exactly reliable. Lin Li still held 3 of Juresco's relics. How could Cheyenne not covet them? Didn't the elves similarly want their star-scarred robe back? However, among these 3 parties, Lin Li was the most worried about the 2 mysterious legendary leaders of the Dark Blade because he had no idea what their abilities were. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. When faced with the mighty WYRMS, even a legendary powerhouse would feel small and insignificant. At this point, the people standing on the ground could not even be bothered to count the number of dragons that were present, for they were already overwhelmed with fear and terror. Lin Li had dealt with the projected avatar of an elemental WYRM before, as well as the unparalleled Titan spirit. However, he could not help but feel on edge now that he was dealing with a flight of WYRMS. It was unlike the menace of the dragon of the projected avatar of the elemental WYRM and the mental blast of the Titan spirit. It was now just a visual attack that was enough to make people feel weak. In this world, a WYRM was already formidable and terrifying enough, for it was a menacing presence that could destroy heaven and earth. The domineering dozens of dragons were shocking and induced despair in them, making them feel as if they would be destroyed together with the world. Could there be a WYRM cave in this canyon? Actually, there was no need for doubts, because the answer was right before them. The Haiga mountain range was termed as the area where life was forbidden. Although everyone knew that the adventure this time came with risks, no one expected to encounter a flight of WYRMS. None of them expected to lead themselves to a dragon's cave after following the map. The WYRMS clearly did not plan to give the intruders time to keep calm, because to them, any intruder could only end up being destroyed and ripped into pieces by them. In no time, the WYRMS had already approached the sky above the adventurer team, and it was not until now that the legendary powerhouses finally recovered from the shock and realized what opponents they were facing. The sky above was almost completely obscured, and there were more than 20 adult green dragons, all of which exuded a formidable aura that would exist only on the legendary level. The adventurers no longer had the choice to leave or fight, for the flying WYRMS did not give them any at all. The leading WYRMS opened their bloodied mouths and spat out emerald dragon's breath that contained the power to destroy everything, covering the intruders below with it. All WYRMS had the ability to spit dragon's breath. It was an ability that they were born with. However, out of all the dragon's breaths, the one of the green dragon was not to be resisted. One might be able to resist the hot flames of the red WYRMS, or survive the absolute chilly and frozen breaths of the blue WYRMS, but no one dared to touch the emerald WYRM's breath. Facing the almost endless breath of the emerald dragons, the adventurers who had just snapped back to reality had no choice but to dodge in different directions, and the team's formation seemed to have been disintegrated. The dragon's breath in the air would destroy everything in its path, be it a hard and sturdy boulder or a plant that had lived in the poisonous fog for a long time. It would leave nothing behind except a strong and pungent stench. That was the green dragon's breath. Apart from being toxic, it could almost eliminate everything because of its corrosiveness. Even the strongest armor couldn't withstand it for a second, and even the body of a legendary figure would be dissolved into a pool of toxic emerald liquid. As the endless dragon's breath spread, the adventurers dodged wherever they could. In the blink of an eye, the ground was corroded by the dragon's breath that left holes and marks on the entire ground. The WYRMS covered the ground with dragon's breath, yet discovered that the abominable invaders were still jumping and struggling. The leading WYRM roared loudly, after which the WYRMS behind it immediately separated and darted towards the invaders who were running away in different directions. They decided to fight on. Did they have any alternative? They flew up into the sky and rushed forth. Even though they were tiny in front of the WYRMS, they had no other choice. If not for that, even with the immortal king's treasure or the lost relic at stake, they'd definitely leave already. When they were outside, Lin Li from the Tower of Dusk was the weakest of the 4 parties, because even the Manhwa family had hundreds of elites above level 15, while Lin Li's side only had 3 members including his followers. However, after they walked through the path of poisonous mist fog and arrived here in the canyon, Cheyenne seemed to be singled out instead. Holding the staff tightly in his hand, Cheyenne cast one magic spell after another and withstood the attacks of 2 adult green dragons, which were even more difficult than human opponents of the same level. In fact, it might be the toughest battle Cheyenne had ever faced since he'd become a legendary powerhouse. When Cheyenne faced the 3 legendary figures of the Dark Blade, he still had the fixed defenses in Amidst City to help balance the power. However, he was now facing 2 legendary adult WYRMs and only had himself to rely on. Chanting a spell and wielding a staff, Cheyenne continued casting magic spells, but he could barely protect himself. He pathetically dodged the surging dragon's breath and escaped the attacks the instant that the defensive magic shattered. Despite being a legendary mage, it was already difficult for him to maintain his poise. Still, he had no choice but to press on. Staring at the situation around him, Cheyenne began to feel increasingly miserable. It would be impossible to get some help in a short period of time, because both the elves and the Dark Blade were dealing with WYRMs that were twice their power. On the elf side, 4 legendary elves dealt with the onslaught of 7 WYRMs, while the Dark Blade was the same. Even Lin Li, the young president who'd never worked hard along the way, seemed to be having it tougher than Cheyenne while facing 7 WYRMs, despite having the help of his undead creatures. Cheyenne's heart sank to rock bottom. He let down his guard, and a WYRM brushed past him and slit his magic robe into 2 pieces. Cheyenne broke out in a cold sweat, and could not be bothered to rely on others. Fully concentrated, he employed all his strength and pathetically struggled as he fought the WYRMs. Just like what Cheyenne had seen, the adventurer team formed by the legendary powerhouses was divided by the overwhelming dragon's breath, while the WYRMs launched maniacal attacks on them, the invaders. None of them could relax at all, and they had no choice but to give it their all. Even Lin Li had to go all out in order to support his teammates and survive the attacks. The WYRMs roared continuously in the valley, and the sounds of the magic spells exploding continuously filled the air, clashing with the destructive dragon's breath. The canyon cliffs on both sides crumbled, while rocks collapsed and eroded, leaving deep black holes. At this moment, a WYRM roared loudly in the midst of the chaotic battle. Its sound was so crisp and clear that the green dragons had no choice but to pause for a while. In the battle group where the elves were, the 8th elder Randy had already disappeared, and a large silver WYRM took his spot. As soon as the silver WYRM appeared, it immediately rushed towards the green WYRM and bit it. Its stout dragon tail was strong enough to pull the green dragon away. This silver dragon, which used almost the same fighting methods as the green dragons, used its claws and teeth to battle the 7 adult green dragons. The roar of the silver dragon immediately caught everyone's attention. Although Lin Li was also in a difficult situation, he did not stop observing the strength of others. Seeing that the elven elder had transformed into a silver dragon, he was rather taken aback too. It was no wonder that he was a descendant of druids. 1. His ability was probably on par with the power of his brother, Garincha. Under the siege of the green dragons, the silver dragon stood out the most, but it no longer seemed as graceful as the elves usually were. Everything about it was crazy and wild. The claws of the dragon exuded explosive power and made a dull sound when colliding with the green dragons. It crushed everything in its way, and its mouth was dripping with dragon saliva while it made a low-pitched roar and bit the green dragons ferociously. If it weren't for the fact that Lin Li had seen it with his own eyes, it would have been hard to imagine that this violent silver dragon was actually the elegant elven elder. Although the elves had established the elven kingdom in the Emerald Forest right after the Dark Age, they had always been very mysterious. However, some time ago, 2 high-level elves, Hulafen and Gilder, visited Lin Li one after another in order to ask him for the antidote for the poisoned elves. During their visits, Lin Li duped them into telling him various stories of the elven kingdom. Although they were just stories, there was plenty of valuable information in them, and Lin Li's understanding of the mysterious druids was also derived from their stories. From the perspective of outsiders, a druid was a member of the profession unique to the elves, and could be considered a mage of nature magic. However, from the stories told by the two high-level elves, Lin Li knew that even druids were actually very different. Elder Randy, who had transformed into a silver dragon, was called the Wild Druid, which meant the strongest warriors among druids. Their power originated from all the beasts in nature, and they gained power far beyond their own through transformation. When a wild druid reached the legendary realm, he could become a dragon, the being at the pinnacle of the world's power. 1. I'm afraid the druid part is ambiguous so far in the novel, sometimes as if a profession and sometimes as if a family clan. Good news, though, it's explained at last at the end of this chapter. A shapeshifted WYRM was only similar to a true one in terms of appearance. Its dragon's breath brought about by the dragon blood was also good for defense and withstanding magic attacks, thus allowing it to perform perfectly. It was even said the druids that shapeshifted into WYRMS could use the powerful dragon language magic just like true WYRMS. Shapeshifting into WYRMS wasn't the peak of the wild druid's power. It was said that after reaching level 22, wild druids could still shapeshift into every kind of powerful prehistoric magical beasts in a short period of time. Those beasts were formidable creatures that shared this continent with ancient WYRMS and the Titans during prehistoric times. Even Lin Li wondered what the wild druids could shapeshift into after reaching Sanctuary Realm. Could it be ancient WYRMS? Whenever the druid occupation was mentioned, people usually thought of shapeshifting into bears or wolves as if turning themselves into animals was the druid's only ability. Before talking to the two high-level elves, Lin Li had thought so too. Actually, there was nothing wrong with such a way of thinking, since shapeshifting wasn't a unique skill only wild druids possessed. Other than wild druids, druids comprised two other branches. One of them was similar to the ones people knew, the nature druids that made up the majority of the druid population. The druids known as nature mages by people originated from among nature druids as they were best at nature magic besides shapeshifting into beasts. The powers of the nature druids came from the sky, sun, moon, and stars. They didn't need to accumulate magic via meditation. They didn't even need to study in order to master nature magic that wasn't at all inferior to elemental magic. As nature druids didn't require many resources from any aspect but also possessed outstanding abilities, they made up the majority of the druids. Wild druids were the strongest warriors, while nature druids were the most common nature mages. There was still an essential group of druids in the elven race, the life druids. Their powers came from the land and streams, mountains, and seas, everything that bred life. Their ability was healing others using their own powers. The role that life druids played in the elven race was similar to that of the priests. It was said that the powerful life druids even possessed the heaven-defying ability of resurrecting the dead. In the elven race, the most well-known life druid was the current elven queen. Her power was likely similar to that of her husband, the wise Garincha. While dealing with the attacking green dragons, Lin Li occasionally turned to observe the elves. Chief Elder Randy shapeshifted into a silver WYRM with astonishing abilities. Facing the attack of 7 full-grown green dragons, the silver WYRM still calmly handled it without putting himself in a difficult position. His fighting prowess made a leap in quality after shapeshifting. However, these 7 full-grown green dragons still owned legendary-level power, after all. If it was a one-on-one battle with the silver WYRM, a green dragon probably wouldn't win. But with 7 attacking together, the silver WYRM that Chief Elder Randy shapeshifted into alone wasn't enough to compete with them. However, the legendary powerhouse Chief Elder Randy wasn't the only one on the elf side. Hielofen and Gilder, the 2 high-ranking elves Lin Li had talked to before, also displayed their true abilities. What surprised Lin Li the most was Hielofen, who'd been the first to visit him. He was surprisingly a mage who specialized in fire magic. No wonder he would exchange ideas with Lin Li about legendary-level magic. Lin Li recalled the time during the auction at the time consignment store, when the debris of the star's rebirth had raised speculation among the mass. Part of it was about an elven mage who specialized in fire magic. Lin Li wondered if this elf mage was related to Kyofen. The current Kyofen had shown the power of at least level 21. Flame domain was fully launched, shrouding the entire battlefield. The uneven ground that was corroded by the green dragon's breath turned into boiling lava. Flocks of fire birds formed with lava flew out and swarmed the green dragons. Fire magic was famous for its attacking power in the first place, not to mention that Kyofen was a legendary mage who specialized in fire magic. Even the green dragons that possessed extraordinary resistance to magic attacks couldn't withstand a single blow from Kyolofen's fire magic. Inside the flame domain, Kyofen used fire magic to attack the green dragons repeatedly. He was always able to provide the silver WYRM with the right amount of help. Of course, legendary mage Kyofen wasn't the only one wholeheartedly aiding the silver WYRM that Chief Elder Randy had shapeshifted into. The other high-ranking elf, Gilder, also showed an impressive performance. Gilder was an archer in the elven race. The 7-star archery skill, which injured Norfeller, that Jacques was so proud of was at Gilder's fingertips. With the sound of the bow and arrow, 7 sharp arrows pierced towards the green dragons as fast as lightning. In comparison, a slightly weaker elf was Princess Elune, who had stepped into the legendary realm just recently. Honestly speaking, the power of the princess could be considered the lowest in the legendary realm. Lin Li believed that with his ability before entering the Scar of Death, or even before he had even touched the legendary realm, it wouldn't be hard for him to defeat this elven princess. However, rumors said that Princess Elune was a druid by occupation, yet she was holding a gorgeous bow like any other legendary archer as if she truly was one. With her own abilities, it was impossible for Princess Elune to provide her comrades with any real help. The best thing she could do was not to cause trouble for the team. However, her current performance didn't match her power because of the gorgeous bow she was holding. Though Princess Elune's own abilities weren't impressive, she appeared unusually calm and faced 7 green dragons. She drew her bow and aligned her arrow without haste. With every arrow fired, a soothing music rang indescribably through the battlefield. Originally ordinary arrows became so powerful under the music that they could even penetrate dragon scales known for their excellent defense. With this gorgeous bow, Princess Elune exhibited at least the power of level 21, despite just reaching the legendary realm. As Lin Li shifted from place to place, he was unable to concentrate on any elf on the battlefield. However, the soothing music coming from his back had given him the answer about Princess Elune's bow. Yes, this music could only be played by the legendary bow, which was passed down among the elves generation after generation, Song of Heart. At the moment, Lin Li had already summoned the humorous WYRM from the summoning lamp. With the resurrection of the Crimson Dragon, this humorous WYRM he had gotten at the Scar of Death was almost level 21 and comparable to a green dragon in power. Lich Uchvalusi had also summoned his own humorous WYRM, Crimson WYRM. This humorous WYRM had originally been shattered by Lin Li using the debris of the stars. After Uchvalusi returned to the legendary realm, he used the original dragon crystal and condensed a new body for the WYRM, which was even stronger than before. Lin Li could be considered giving his all now. It was almost impossible to hold anything back while facing the joint attack of 7 green dragons. However, despite the difficulty, he still didn't give up observing others. After all, other people were probably also observing him even at this moment. Hearing the soothing music that was clearly audible even amidst the dragon roars, Lin Li recalled what the Song of Heart was like. He felt that this bow passed down generations of elves seemed a little familiar. It was inevitable to associate the Song of Heart with a remarkable elf from after the Dark Age, Wind Whisperer Hull, one of the 7 sages. Although there were a lot of archers in the elven race who were indeed highly talented in archery, Wind Whisperer Hull was the only true archer who had reached Sanctuary Realm. This Song of Heart was the weapon Wind Whisperer Hull had carried with him all the time, and its soothing music had sent countless people to their death. According to legends, during that massacre of elves by human coalition forces, the 7 sages led the surviving elves across the Haiga mountain range and entered the Emerald Forest. The goddess of nature ManhwaRecap released a miracle which deterred most human troops. Only the troop from Leaden Kingdom kept chasing the elves as if they wouldn't stop until all the elves were dead. At that moment, Wind Whisperer Hull already shot an arrow out of the Emerald Forest. Everyone, even those who witnessed it with their own eyes, didn't know the true power of this rather baffling arrow and the soothing music that followed. However, before long, they heard the news that in Leaden Kingdom, thousands of miles away, the first king of the Leaden Kingdom was shot to death in his royal palace by an arrow out of nowhere. It should be known that at that time, the Leaden Kingdom's king had several legendary powerhouses by his side for protection against assassination. However, the power of that arrow was so strong that the king was headshot and died before the legendary powerhouses could do anything. When both pieces of news were put together, an uproar arose in the human kingdoms as nobody could believe that a single arrow shot from the Emerald Forest could travel through thousands of miles across the Haiga mountain range and kill the Leaden Kingdom's monarch. However, the truth was that Wind Whisperer Hull had indeed killed him with an arrow. His weapon at that time was in fact this very Song of Heart. Lin Li, however, was concerned about neither the legends surrounding the Song of Hearts nor its power. He looked at the Song of Heart because he noticed its resemblance to the Stars of Fury. Judging from the exterior, the Song of Heart was designed in classic elven style. With the intricate patterns on its arch arm and gems embedded on it, the Song of Heart looked arrogant and exquisite. On the other hand, the Stars of Fury looked far less attractive. It was designed in a rather primitive style. Though it didn't look very beautiful, it gave people a sense of solemnity. Hence, it could be said that the outer appearance of these two weapons was polar opposites. Speaking of power, the Song of Heart couldn't match the Stars of Fury even though it was a weapon that was passed down generations of elves and possessed considerable power. Wind Whisperer Hull had once shot an arrow from the Song of Heart and killed the Leaden Kingdom's ruler thousands of miles away. However, if the arrow was shot from the Stars of Fury, even a normal arrow without using the debris of the stars could destroy the entire Leaden Kingdom. However, Lin Li still felt that there were some slight similarities between these two. This made him suspect that the guru-level master who constructed the Song of Heart had probably seen the Stars of Fury before. Lin Li believed that nobody could completely replicate the Stars of Fury, even a legendary divine smith couldn't do that. However, it was possible for a clever smithing guru to construct the Song of Heart after drawing inspiration from the Stars of Fury. Otherwise, Lin Li wouldn't have found the Song of Heart familiar as the possessor of the Stars of Fury. Several thoughts emerged in Lin Li's mind, but his actions weren't affected by his thoughts at all. After all, even with the assistance of 2 undead creatures and 2 humorous WYRMs, he couldn't afford to make any mistakes when battling 7 adult green dragons. At a time like this, what was the use of holding back? It would be worse if he died while holding his trump card. Lin Li's robe suddenly stopped moving as if the turbulence caused by the green dragon's flapping wings had totally disappeared. Next, he raised his Helios scepter slowly, and powerful mental strength radiated throughout the area. Following the recitation of spells, dark clouds loomed over the sky, and the battlefield on Lin Li's side was covered in darkness. Snow fell into the darkness, forming a frosty world almost instantly. This frosty world was in a stark contrast to the Kilophen's flame domain. After the magical domain of frost, light, and darkness had been unleashed, snow monsters rushed towards the green dragons once they were formed. The angels of light and dark flapped their black and white wings and stabbed their frost spears at the green dragons. With Lin Li currently being level 21 and his new knowledge obtained from the Book of Eternity, his understanding of rule power was much higher than before. Even if he hadn't integrated holy light and gloomy dark, his magical domain would have still been much more powerful than before. However, these green dragons also possessed power above level 20. Moreover, they also had very high magic resistance and defense. Hence, they were equally violent despite being in the magical domain of frost, light, and darkness. The countless snow monsters and angels of light and dark could only combat the green dragons for a little while. In less than 15 minutes, their bodies were torn into pieces and disappeared in the magical domain. After putting in his all to stabilize the magical domain, Lin Li looked at the Dark Blades battle again. If there was a faction most likely to become his enemy, it would be the Dark Blade. Hence, Lin Li had to understand the Dark Blade's abilities a little more. Although that would put more pressure on himself, Lin Li wouldn't miss this opportunity to know more about the Dark Blade's abilities. In fact, Lin Li was shocked by what he saw. In the elf's battle just behind him, the silver Wyrm chief elder Randy had shapeshifted into, could barely resist the attacks from 7 green dragons even with the help of 3 other elves. However, the 3 legendary chiefs of the Dark Blade seemed to be facing the 7 green dragons at ease. Lin Li couldn't help but gasp. No wonder the 3 chiefs of the Dark Blade were legendary powerhouses. Given that Cheyenne had led the Manhwa family thus far, it was remarkable that he could protect the Manhwa family from being wiped out by the Dark Blade for such a long time. Legendary sword Sage Baldella's moves were powerful and big. Although he waved his sword at the dragons directly, he didn't seem to be at disadvantage at all. God knew how much power was contained in his body. His sword might not be able to harm the green dragons directly, but every attack would make the mammoth green dragons move back. The green dragons roared continuously as if in disbelief, as this worm-like intruder had so much strength that forced them to move back involuntarily. Meanwhile, the elegant bandit Lansdale waved his thin sword agilely and didn't change his demeanor. A green dragon waved its claws as if chasing after a mosquito, but it could only catch air. The legendary mage Borg that Lin Li had most contact with couldn't be underestimated either. He waved his magic staff continuously, releasing high-level spells one after another like a thunderstorm. This level 21 legendary mage was probably on the verge of level 22. With the abilities of the 3 legendary chiefs, it was only a matter of time before the Dark Blade wiped out the Manhwa family. Cheyenne was probably aware of that too. Thus, he seized on the opportunity of finding the immortal king's treasure, hoping that it would give the Manhwa family more breathing room to survive. However, what really surprised Lin Li in the Dark Blade's battle wasn't the 3 chiefs' true power, but Stephen Borg had added to the elite team later on. Lin Li knew that Borg wouldn't let his son die here. However, he hadn't expected that Borg's confidence didn't come from his ability to protect Stephen, but rather Stephen's own power. Surprisingly, Stephen wasn't a burden to anyone during this battle. How could Lin Li not be surprised? After all, he knew about Stephen's level. Back when they were contending for Juresco's relics, Hutton, Stephen, and Lin Li had been sent into the abyss of Tharlan by Tutankhamun. Although Stephen was called the most talented genius in the breezy plains together with Hutton, he had just been a level 17 or 18 archmage back then, not even a match for Hutton. How long had it been since then? Stephen's power had already undergone such drastic changes. Now, he seemed to be one step away from reaching the legendary realm. This wasn't just about the accumulation of mana. After all, a mage who only had enough mana was still far from reaching the legendary realm. However, once he had touched the slightest bit of rule power, he would be almost there. Although Lin Li faced immense pressure currently, he could spot some clues from the magic Stephen was using. Although that magic wasn't able to harm the green dragons much, the spells already possessed elements of rules. That wasn't rule power, of course, otherwise, he would have already reached the legendary realm. However, one should not underestimate the elements of rules. To a mage, they were the key to unlocking the legendary realm. Only after getting them could a mage be considered one step away from the legendary realm, as he only had to find his own door to the legendary realm with this key. Thus, even the elements of rules were crucial to a mage. Many mages had stopped right before the legendary realm, because they couldn't get this key. This wasn't something that they could get with just hard work. It required personal talent and some unpredictable luck. Evidently, whether Stephen was truly talented or extremely lucky, he had firmly secured this key. With the elements of rules, his magic wouldn't make him a burden to the stronger companions even though it couldn't harm the green dragons. After seeing Stephen's performance, Lin Li's doubts didn't just disappear. Although Stephen's abilities were totally different from before, Lin Li was just a little surprised. What kind of place was this? Even a true legendary powerhouse couldn't guarantee his own safety. With Stephen's current abilities reaching legendary realm, how helpful would he be to the Dark Blade? Clearly, Borg hadn't insisted on bringing Steven along simply for more combat experience. What exactly was his aim, then? While Lin Li was puzzled, he didn't forget about his own difficult situation now. Out of the 4 battles of the various factions, the one that faced the most pressure wasn't Cheyenne, who was battling 2 green dragons alone, but Lin Li. On the elf side, there was Chief Elder Randy, who had shapeshifted into a sliver Wyrm, a legendary mage who specialized in fire magic, and even the powerful Song of Heart. On the Dark Blade side, the 3 chiefs cooperated very well and appeared to be at ease even when facing 7 green dragons. However, Lin Li was just a level 21 legendary mage himself. His subordinate Lich Ujfalusi had reached the peak of level 20, but he hadn't reached level 21, after all. With the help of a summoned humorous Wyrm, Ujfalusi could only barely battle 2 green dragons. As for Vampire Norfeller, he hadn't even reached legendary realm, and could offer very limited help to Lin Li. Although Lin Li had summoned the Crimson Dragon right at the start, it wasn't a true Crimson Dragon, but one formed from a humorous Wyrm and a Crimson Dragon's corpse. Despite being much more powerful than a humorous Wyrm, this Crimson Dragon was still no match compared to a true Wyrm. At the surface, the Tower of Dusk seemed to be powerful and strong since it had both undead creatures and humorous Wyrms at its disposal. However, even if each of them could battle 1 dragon, Lin Li still had to deal with 3 green dragons all by himself. Lin Li was just a level 21 legendary mage. Even with all the techniques he was using and the experience he had gained from the Book of Eternity, the pressure he faced when battling with 3 legendary dragons was still immense, as the difference in power between them was too huge. He had to break out of this situation fast. If not, his mana would be depleted even with the star-scarred robe. Lin Li turned back and dealt with the current circumstances wholeheartedly, thinking of ways to change his situation. With the current situation, the whole team would perish within minutes if Lin Li didn't deal with 3 or even 4 green dragons at once. As such, Lin Li didn't have time to release more powerful legendary magic. As for instantaneous legendary magic, it was too weak to take down the green dragons. Now, the most urgent problem was that there was no warrior in the Tower of Dusk who'd be able to cause any real damage to the dragons or resist their attacks directly. The elves had the silver Wyrm, the Dark Blade had Sword Sage Baldella, but what about the Tower of Dusk? The only one who could be considered a warrior was Vampire Norfeller. However, he hadn't reached legendary realm, and couldn't even deal with a green dragon by himself. How could he withstand so much pressure to give Lin Li time to release sufficiently strong legendary magic? However, Lin Li's eyes flashed. Since nobody could withstand the green dragon's attack directly and by time for him to release legendary magic, how about the reverse? He could be the one to withstand the attacks and let others deal the killing blow. Norfeller, do you want to have a taste of the dragon's blood? Yelled Lin Li. As he pointed the Helios scepter forward, powerful magic swarmed out. It didn't just aim at the dragons he was battling, but also the other green dragons. The 7 green dragons fighting against the Tower of Dusk roared at once. They ignored their original opponents and pounced towards that insignificant human who was provoking them. Ujfalusi and the 2 humorous Wyrms hurried to Lin Li's side and helped their master to battle the 7 dragons. Now, all of them started dealing with the dragon's attack together. Lin Li, Ujfalusi, and the 2 humorous Wyrms withstood the 7 green dragons' attacks with all they had. Under such circumstances, Vampire Norfeller seemed to have become an outsider. Just like what Lin Li had thought, others were watching him as well while he was watching the others. Seeing that Lin Li had made such a bad move, be it the elves or the Dark Blade, they couldn't help but scold Lin Li internally. As for Cheyenne, who was battling 2 green dragons, his expression got more bitter. If the Tower of Dusk perished just like this, what good could he get even if the team had found the treasure? Indeed, Lin Li's move seemed to be a bad move from anyone's perspective. When facing the green dragons with very high magic resistance, how could a mage withstand all their attacks? If he really couldn't find a way out of the situation, the best solution would be to persevere and wait for other stronger factions to help. This youngster was still too impulsive even though he had such a high level of abilities and talent. The biggest problem was, even if Lin Li wanted to die, how could he drag the others down as well? Almost everyone complained about this young legendary mage in their hearts. If the Tower of Dusk was wiped out under the dragon's attacks, who was going to deal those dragons? After all, nobody there could deal with another 7 dragons. However, just then, vampire Norfeller, who'd seemed to be an outsider just now, suddenly turned into a bat and shot out from the black fog that he had created towards the green dragons that were attacking Lin Li. In face of the gigantic green dragons, the human body was already very small. A vampire that had shapeshifted into a bat was like a fly to the dragons, and wouldn't garner their attention at all. However, this seemingly insignificant little fly was Lin Li's killer move. While the dragons were busy dealing with these wretched humans, and the humorous WYRMS that dirted the WYRMS dignity, nobody noticed the fly-like little bat. The bat zoomed into the dragon's territory and selected a relatively weaker dragon quickly. Without facing any obstacles, it directly landed on the green dragon's neck. Although the dragon's defense was very strong, Norfeller was, after all, approaching legendary realm. With the vampire's talent of blood-sucking, his sharp teeth were a natural lethal weapon. Moreover, Norfeller's body was much smaller now as a bat, and the dragons appeared even larger from his perspective. Some of the dragon's flaws, that couldn't be seen before, could now be seen clearly by Norfeller. Just like how humans had pores, the dragons weren't totally covered with scales. What Norfeller was finding were these cracks between the scales. Soon, Norfeller found a suitable spot and bit down hard with his sharp teeth, trying to tear the wound and make it bigger. This tiny bit of pain was like a mosquito's bite to a dragon. It didn't bother the dragon at all, and the dragon continued to focus on attacking. However, the bitten green dragon started to feel that something was not right with its body not long after. It felt as if its strength was flowing uncontrollably out of its body. Meanwhile, Norfeller, who was lying on the green dragon's neck, was sucking the delicious dragon blood with all his might. Although the green dragon's blood contained toxins as well, it was nothing to Norfeller. After all, it was a vampire's innate talent to obtain energy from blood. As for the impurities in blood, they would naturally be cleared away by the vampire's body. If not, a vampire wouldn't be able to suck much blood from a gigantic green dragon even if its stomach exploded. Be it the ancient WYRMS or prehistoric magical beasts, their blood all contained huge amounts of energy. It was for this reason that their descendants could become powerful magical beasts just by inheriting a portion of their blood. In Annal of Now, ancient WYRMS had already disappeared. Thus, the WYRMS which inherited the greatest proportion of the ancient WYRMS blood were now the most powerful creatures in the world. Although these green dragons had the lowest rank among all WYRMS, they still possessed legendary level abilities. Therefore, the energy their blood contained was naturally very strong. Norfeller sucked the dragon's blood and absorbed its purest energy for its own use. For a mage to reach the legendary realm, he had to gain understanding of rule power. However, Lin Li wasn't sure how undead creatures like vampires could reach the legendary realm. Even Norfeller himself wasn't sure of how to do so. After all, he was converted by his former master and stayed in the tomb for many years. After he had come out, he followed his human master, Lin Li, and didn't join any vampire clans. Thus, a blurry soul inheritance wasn't enough for him to know how to break through to the legendary realm. However, with the energy from the dragon's blood, the door to the legendary realm seemed to be slowly opening for Norfeller. The bat lying on the green dragon's neck looked like a black dot from afar, but this black dot started to glow. The intensity of the glow increased gradually, until it got so strong that it was dazzling. When the other green dragons noticed the abnormal state of their peer, it was already too late. The green dragon that had been sucked of its blood finally let out a last bitter roar and collapsed onto the ground. One green dragon detached itself from the battle and rushed towards its fallen companion, breathing out a thick dragon's breath towards its companion's neck. Although it wasn't sure what its companion had just experienced, its companion was already dead now. That golden light spot seemed too suspicious. Without caring about its companion's corpse, the dragon just wanted to kill that gold spot with its dragon's breath. Norfeller had sucked all the blood from the dragon and directly broke through to the legendary realm. For a vampire, this meant a leap in the quality of his abilities. In face of the dragon's breath, Norfeller concentrated his power and leaped onto the other dragon's neck just before its dragon's breath could reach his body. One dragon's breath already corroded half of the dead green dragon's corpse. The dragon that came later was totally oblivious of the catastrophe that was waiting for it, and roared with pride. It then turned back to continue the fight with Lin Li and others. Norfeller, who had already reached the legendary realm now, was much faster at consuming the dragon blood. Soon, this dragon that thought it had avenged its companion collapsed onto the ground with a roar, just like its dead companion. Not long after this dragon fell, Norfeller used the same trick on another green dragon. For a vampire like Norfeller, this was a rare opportunity. Since vampires had existed in this world, none of them had ever been so lucky to get access to so much dragon blood. For a level 19 vampire like Norfeller, he wouldn't be able to bear even a single dragon's breath even though he'd been approaching the legendary realm. After all, though he could resist the toxins in the dragon's breath, he couldn't resist such strong corrosion. Thus, he would turn into a pool of liquid in the blink of an eye. However, it was different now. The large group of green dragons was focusing on the fight with a team of legendary powerhouses. His master Lin Li even led his subordinates to deal with the combined attacks of 7 green dragons, putting his life at stake. What Norfeller needed to do was just to land on an unlucky dragon's neck and enjoy its delicious dragon blood. After sucking the blood from 3 consecutive dragons, Norfeller's power jumped from level 19 to 21. Even Ujfalusi was just at the peak of level 20 now. In such a short period of time, Norfeller surpassed Ujfalusi, who had previously been much stronger than him. With the consecutive fall of 3 green dragons, everyone who was paying attention to this was stunned. How could these legendary level green dragons just collapse like this? As for what had happened, all these legendary powerhouses naturally had some ideas already. It was precisely because they knew the reason for the collapse that it harder for them to accept the truth. How could it have been done by a level 19 vampire? Nobody had expected Lin Li's killer move to be this level 19 vampire. Had it been on impulse, or had Lin Li planned it all along? No matter what the reason was, this sight made all the legendary powerhouses feel chills running down their spines. If it had been on impulse, it meant that Lin Li was cruel enough to himself. If it had been planned beforehand, then Lin Li's forbearance was truly remarkable. He could force himself to face the dragon's breath in order to create an opportunity for his vampire subordinate to attack. This wasn't as simple as attracting the dragons and letting the vampire attack, but rather required a very good judgment of the situation. After all, the situation on the battlefield could change at every moment, and the slightest mistake could result in death. Now, the situation on the Tower of Dusk side was drastically different just because of a level 19 vampire. After Norfeller had killed 3 green dragons, the ones that were attacking Lin Li and his subordinates were reduced to 4. As for Norfeller, he had used the energy from the dragon blood to level up to level 21. As such, the situation was reversed immediately. The 4 green dragon were of legendary level, but they now faced 3 legendary powerhouses and 2 humorous WYRMs. No matter what others speculated about this young president of the Tower of Dusk, all of them knew that this bitter battle was coming to an end after the Tower of Dusk had broken the deadlock. As long as the Tower of Dusk side had defeated the other 4 green dragons, other factions would have the aid of the Tower of Dusk. No matter which faction the Tower of Dusk decided to help, the result would be the same. That meant it was now possible to defeat all the dragons. Upon seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, everyone was extremely motivated, whether for the immortal king's treasure or the long-lost sacred relic. Back when 20-odd dragons had appeared, everyone thought that their mission would fail this time, and it might even be difficult to leave this place alive. However, nobody had expected the Tower of Dusk to break the deadlock so speedily. As such, who else could hinder their mission other than these 20+ dragons? However, just as everyone started to feel a sense of joy, a loud dragon roar was heard deep inside the dragon's den. This roar was like huge sea wave, sweeping through the valley and making all the legendary powerhouses lose their balance in the air. Like the sound of thunder, the roar penetrated deep into everyone's soul, pushing their soul onto the verge of destruction. In a split second, everyone's face turned as pale as sheet. Even a level 21 legendary powerhouse like Lin Li couldn't help but tremble with fear. Following the dragon's roar, strong wind swept through the valley, making everyone uncontrollably retreat. Under the strong wind, a green silhouette flew out from the depths of the valley. Its powerful aura could make heaven and earth change their colors. 1. Everyone looked towards the silhouette under the strong winds. What appeared in front of their eyes was still a green dragon. However, this green dragon was more than 10 times the size of those green dragons they had encountered so far. The menace of the dragon that this green dragon released was also much more powerful. Even the legendary powerhouses present found it hard to bear. The silver WYRM chief elder Randy had shapeshifted into changed back to his elf form again, and he stared at this green dragon with disbelief. When he was in his silver WYRM form, he felt an even stronger sense of helplessness upon sensing the menace of the dragon. It felt as if he was facing the king, and totally couldn't resist it at all. Chief Elder Randy had a terrifying thought in mind regarding this dragon's identity. More accurately, it wasn't a random thought, but an acute realization. Not just Chief Elder Randy, the other legendary powerhouses, too, had already guessed that this dragon was the Green Dragon King, judging from its size and menace of the dragon. Evidently, this was a raging Green Dragon King. Its red eyes were filled with killing intent, and its menace of the dragon was further evidence of its fury. Everyone only had one thought in mind: this was going to be a big problem. Everyone here was a legendary powerhouse who was considered very powerful in the outside world. However, now that they were facing the Green Dragon King, everyone just felt that their own abilities that they were so proud of were so insignificant and absurd compared to this Green Dragon King. When the team faced over 20 green dragons, they could at least try to defeat them. However, now that they were facing this Green Dragon King, they just felt a sense of despair and helplessness. The difference in power couldn't be compromised by courage. Although the team wasn't sure how strong this Green Dragon King was exactly, its menace of the dragon was so powerful it felt similar to the aura of a Sanctuary Realm powerhouse. Even if this Green Dragon King didn't have Sanctuary Realm power, it wouldn't be far from Sanctuary level. Facing such a powerful component, who was able to compete against it? Even Chief Elder Randy, who was the strongest out of all these legendary powerhouses, had lost the ability to use his silver WYRM form properly. Even if all the legendary powerhouses' power was combined, they still wouldn't stand any chance of surviving in face of this Green Dragon King's attack. 1. A metaphor, or rather a fancy exaggeration. Moreover, everyone was not just facing a Green Dragon King whose power was close to the Sanctuary Realm, they also had to deal with the surrounding green dragons. In the battle so far, the team had experienced how powerful these green dragons were. If the Tower of Dusk hadn't broken the deadlock, nobody knew what the result would have been. As such, there didn't seem to be any chance of survival for the team now. Everyone's joy from the earlier victory disappeared, replaced by uncontrollable despair. Chief Elder Randy was the strongest legendary druid out of all. However, his fingers still trembled now after feeling the Dragon King's menace. He gave up thinking about how to get out of this impasse, because nothing would be able to save them when facing such absolute power. Unless a Sanctuary Realm powerhouse appeared, but that was clearly impossible. Chief Elder Randy only felt despair and regret now. What he regretted the most was bringing Princess Elune here. If possible, he was willing to give up his own life in exchange for Princess Elune's safety. However, such a wish was impossible to fulfill, given the current situation. This was a true impasse. Facing such a strong opponent, any effort or struggle would be futile. Chief Elder Randy had always thought that his strength was enough to protect Princess Elune from all kinds of danger. However, judging from the situation now, he'd been too proud of his power to have such a thought. If not for that human mage, he would have only been able to watch Princess Elune die in front of his eyes after she'd been poisoned. Now, he felt his own lack of power and sense of despair again when facing this Green Dragon King. However, whom could he turn for help this time? No one. Miracles wouldn't happen twice. Chief Elder Randy finally realized why he couldn't become a sage like his elder brother, despite being the 8th elder of the Emerald Council. This wasn't because he didn't have strong power, but because he had always put family before the entire elven race. If he had discussed with the 7 sages before coming to seek the sacred relic here in the Haiga mountain range, it wouldn't have turned out like this no matter which sage led the team. However, what was the use of thinking about this now? Regret didn't serve any purpose after all. Chief Elder Randy wasn't the only legendary powerhouse who was in despair. Everyone had their own thoughts and concerns, because this was the only thing they could do at this moment. However, one person's expression was totally different from the rest. Although he also felt a sense of despair after the appearance of the Green Dragon King, he displayed a tinge of relief. That person was Cheyenne from the Manhwa family. Cheyenne was relieved precisely because of the impasse they were in now. He knew that no matter how many legendary powerhouses his faction had now, nobody could survive the Green Dragon King's attack. This meant that even if he couldn't get out of here alive, the 3 legendary chiefs of the Dark Blade would similarly die here. Cheyenne was insistent on getting the Immortal King's treasure because he had felt the threat of the Dark Blade. He hoped that obtaining the Immortal King's treasure could balance the scales between 2 factions, or even let the Manhwas surpass the Dark Blade. However, the appearance of the Dark Blade made this hope more and more distant. Yet, he was forced to continue because of that slight hope. Even if they found the Immortal King's treasure successfully, Cheyenne wouldn't be able to guarantee that he could obtain enough power to challenge the Dark Blade. However, it was probably the best ending now. After both factions had lost their legendary powerhouses, the power distribution between the 2 factions would go back to an equilibrium. Perhaps the Manhwa family's development would sink into a period of all-time low. However, it still stood a chance to rise up again since his best disciple Hutton was still around. That old lad Borg probably now regretted letting his son Stephen participate in this adventure. Thinking of all that, a smile appeared on Cheyenne's face even when he was in such an impasse. As a legendary mage, how would Cheyenne not notice Stephen's outstanding performance just now? Seeing that Stephen had released magic that contained elements of rules, how would Cheyenne not be surprised? However, so what if he was a genius? Would a dead genius still be a genius? Now, nobody even thought about leaving this place alive. It was meaningless to try to find any ways of survive. It was said that when a person was going to die, his past memories would flash past his mind vividly. What they could do now was to wait for the Green Dragon King to strike. Before that, they could only occupy themselves with endless memories and regret. If he were to die here, could he go back to the original world? Lin Li felt despair too. Back when he'd faced the Lord of Darkness, the elemental WYRM's projected avatar, or the Titan's spirit, he had never given up the fight. However, he really couldn't find a way out now. All potions, the alchemy arrays, and all ideas he could think of flashed across his mind. However, he still couldn't find any solution. The difference in power was too great. Even though Lin Li had miracles like the debris of the stars, his actual abilities couldn't fully utilize the debris of the stars' potential. As Lin Li was thinking of various things, he felt some movement on his finger. Before he could react, the baby elemental WYRM, Xiaohua, came out of Dream Garden and flew towards the Green Dragon King. Lin Li's heart tensed. He regretted not applying a restriction spell on Dream Garden. Although the baby elemental WYRM's origin was rather remarkable. It had just hatched, and only possessed level 15 power now. If it was another place, level 15 would be considered very strong already. However, now in the Haiga Mountains, the Green Dragon King had power approaching Sanctuary Realm. Under the Green Dragon King's powerful menace, even a legendary powerhouse could barely survive and find it difficult to move. Even if Xiaohua was an elemental WYRM and had a spiritual connection with Lin Li, it still wouldn't be able to survive under the terrifying menace of the dragon. This wasn't just a light difference in strength, but a difference of more than 10 levels. It was as if the difference between heaven and earth, even endless mana, wouldn't be able to make up for such difference. Lin Li had forgotten his despair now. He only felt very worried for Xiaohua. He even wished he could rush forward and beat Xiaohua up. Damn it! How much effort he had put in and how much pain he had endured to establish such a close relationship with Xiaohua. He was still expecting Xiaohua to bring lots of benefits for him. Now, perhaps all his efforts would be gone with the Green Dragon King's sneeze. Lin Li even doubted if the Green Dragon King could see the fly-like baby elemental WYRM. After all, the baby elemental WYRM was only palm-sized. Maybe the baby elemental WYRM would enter the Green Dragon King's nostrils when it took a breath. Just as Lin Li wanted to catch the baby elemental WYRM back despite danger, he froze and stared at the unbelievable scene in front of his eyes, stunned. The baby elemental WYRM's small body flew towards a Green Dragon King like a tiny spark of dust. However, its menace of the dragon was abruptly distinct when mixed with the Green Dragon King's menace. The scene that Lin Li had imagined didn't eventuate. The Green Dragon King didn't sneeze, but rather withdrew part of his menace when the baby elemental WYRM flew near. Evidently, the Green Dragon King had good eyesight but low intelligence. An extremely bizarre scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The Green Dragon King, which was full of rage just now acted like a little puppy who had just seen its master and lowered its gigantic head. After careful inspection, the legendary powerhouses finally saw the funny side of a baby elemental WYRM waving its tiny claws at the Green Dragon King fiercely without caring how feeble it was compared to the Green Dragon King. Indeed, it was funny. Everyone who saw this sight forgot about the impasse they had been in and about their sense of despair. They even had the impulse to laugh out loud. Although the baby elemental WYRM's roar seemed rather absurd to the team, the Green Dragon King seemed to be unable to resist its command. The surrounding green dragons that circled the team now seemed like they had seen something extremely terrifying. They hid behind the back of the Green Dragon King, seeking protection while looking timidly at the small baby elemental WYRM. Looking at this absurd sight, no one knew what was happening, what this small little thing was, and why the Green Dragon King with power approaching Sanctuary Realm would behave so humbly in front of this little thing. Everyone could feel that this little thing was only level 15, yet it was precisely this little thing that made the Green Dragon King lower its head. However, they also knew that no matter what this little thing was, its master, the young legendary mage from the Tower of Dusk, was by its side. Everyone had to reassess Lin Li again. How many other secrets was this young legendary mage hiding? He could easily detoxify the deadly viper's poison and think of using the vampire to break the deadlock when facing the attacks of the green dragons. Now that everyone was facing the Green Dragon King whose strength approached Sanctuary Realm and thought that they couldn't escape, it was Lin Li again who released this little thing that seemed to have tamed the Green Dragon King. Terrifying, this young legendary mage was too terrifying. If this little thing had really tamed the Green Dragon King, would it make the Green Dragon King attack the team? After all, it was almost certain that the elf's sacred relic and the immortal king's treasure both lay inside the dragon's den. If it was them, they would keep it all for themselves. However, Lin Li didn't have the strength to care what others thought about him. He concentrated on the baby elemental WYRM that was swaggering around the Green Dragon King. After further observation, Lin Li suddenly saw a shadow on top of the baby elemental WYRM's head. The shadow was very faint and blurry, but the aura it released felt very familiar to Lin Li. That was the elemental WYRM's projected avatar. Lin Li suddenly recalled the painful battle he had had in the valley. He would never forget the opponent's aura that brought him so much heart-piercing pain. Back then, Lin Li had suspected that the projected avatar came from one of the 4 dragon aspects, the Dragon of Dream. Judging from current circumstances, his guess was probably right. Lin Li finally understood why the baby elemental WYRM could disregard the difference in levels and make the powerful green dragon king lower its head. It was because of the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar. As one of the 4 dragon aspects, the Dragon of Dream was the most noble dragon even among the ancient dragons. Although the Green Dragon King was the king of the green dragons, it was still only a descendant of the ancient dragons. Thus, it couldn't disobey even the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar's will. This had nothing to do with power, but concerned the bloodline instead. The innate fear and respect for the higher beings was like a blood curse passed down generations of dragons. Nobody could underestimate its effect unless someone was willing to forsake his bloodline. Of course, that would be impossible to achieve as well. Even though Lin Li had thought of all that, he still found the sight too bizarre. He had thought that the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar would have disappeared and become an imprint on the baby elemental WYRM's soul after it integrated with the baby WYRM. However, it seemed like the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar had quite the will to survive. It didn't get absorbed by the baby elemental WYRM, nor did it get imprinted on the baby elemental WYRM's soul. Instead, it existed in the baby WYRM's body in another form. Lin Li didn't know whether this was a good thing or not. However, judging from the current situation, the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar had resolved a difficult problem for Lin Li by subduing this green dragon king whose power approached sanctuary realm. However, his worry didn't decrease because of this. After all, he didn't know if the existence of the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar would affect the baby elemental WYRM's growth and development. He also didn't know if the one roaring at the Green Dragon King now was baby elemental WYRM Xiao Hua or the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.